So you want to make your own deck in Clash Royale. Well, where do you start? Where do you finish? What do you do? That's what I'm here for. Today, I'm going to help you build a deck from scratch and make it actually work. Let's get started with the win conditions. Before you get any further, what is a win condition? A win condition is something that you can make directly target the tower. So by default, the Royal Giant will target the tower unless distracted by a building. And the exception to this is things you can place directly on the tower, such as a miner, a goblin barrel, and a graveyard. So you could choose your win condition. And quickly, I want to state that we're going to try and keep the average elixir cost between around 3 and 3.8. I understand that certain high-end beatdown decks will go above that, and that's fine. We'll get to that later in the video. But for the most part, we want to keep our average elixir cost as low as we can while keeping our decks still strong and maintaining all the core points that we reach in this video. And that directly relates to secondary win condition. Now, why would I consider it a secondary win condition? Well, ask yourself this. Do you trust your win condition? Now, this is a good question to ask. Let's say I'm a Royal Giant player once again, and the Royal Giant is something that you can build a deck around and consistently get this guy to the tower and rely on him to do your big damage. Let's say you're a Suspicious Bush player. Can you rely on the Suspicious Bush to get to the tower consistently? Probably not. So this is where you consider secondary win conditions. To get a little deeper into win conditions, let's talk about archetypes. Now, an archetype, what is that? That's kind of a style of play. So for example, beatdown. Beatdown is a type of style of deck where you build the big push and try and take your opponent's tower with a big push. Typically, it's a heavy elixir cost deck. Cycle is something where, obviously, you can probably tell you have a very fast cycle and want to cycle your win condition often to try and get to the tower as much as possible. And then you kind of build a deck around getting that win condition to the tower. And let's go into bridge spam. You have bridge spam, where you throw a bunch of cards at the bridge and try and overwhelm your opponent, break through. You have bait, where you're using maybe a goblin barrel or something like that, basically to force out your opponent's spells or swarm answers, and then responding with another thing that requires a spell or answer. An easy way to explain this is Goblin Barrel and Skeleton Barrel paired together. Your opponent logs one of them, the other one has a higher chance of making it through. So when you pick your win condition, you have to do an archetype test. What archetype is the win condition I want to play? Let's once again go with the Royal Giant. Do I want to build a Royal Giant deck with big pushes and take my opponent's tower? Not exactly, because the Royal Giant is kind of a far away tower troop dealing thing. Do I want to bait with the Royal Giant? I mean, you could, but that doesn't help your Royal Giant at all, so probably not. What would be the most beneficial is to cycle with the Royal Giant. We want to get as many Royal Giants down as we can, so we want to make a cycle deck around this. And this works for any win condition in the game. What do I want to do with my win condition? Let's say we're a Suspicious Bush player. Once again, you probably won't have very much success by yourself with the Suspicious Bush. So you're going to want to pair it with, do we want to make a Suspicious Bush cycle deck? Well, sort of. Do we want to make a beatdown deck with it? No, not really. What would make sense is to make a bait deck with it, because that way the cards that bait out, or my Suspicious Bush bait out, will open up other opportunities for my other cards, or vice versa. You can keep going. You can go Goblin Barrel. Do we want to make a Goblin Barrel beatdown deck? Probably not, if you want to have success with your card. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. Pick your archetype, or pick your win condition, and then think about what would be strongest with it. So moving on to spells. Now I'm going to use the example of the Royal Giant and continue using it, but this example will work for any win condition you guys choose, and I want you to run this test with me. Similar to the archetype test we did, what would help my Royal Giant the most, or enter win condition you're using. So once again, just look at your win condition and try and think of its weaknesses. Now, what stands out to me is swarm units. The Royal Giant struggles against swarm units, and it struggles against things like buildings. So when I'm using my win condition, you want to think about possibly 2 spells. The goal is to just get 2 spells in there. I can't think of a deck off the top of my head that has 1 spell in it. It's typically always a small spell and a larger spell. In very rare circumstances, maybe you'll see 2 small spells, or you typically want to go with a small and a big spell. A big spell is going to allow you to break through troops, get damage. A small spell is going to help with containment, with swarm cards, with defense. So Obviously, my go-to spell is the log, just because that's, you know, the most versatile spell in the game, even with its recent nerf. But we're going to think about our win condition. We're going to think about its weaknesses. For me, with the Royal Giant, it's probably something like, you know, a Goblin Gang. I mean, we could use we could use a Zap, we could use a Bar Barrel, we could use a Snowball, we could use, I don't know if I want to call arrows a small spell, but you could use arrows. Something that I want to clarify is that you're going to see a lot of our examples turn into decks that look suspiciously like meta decks. Now, what is a meta deck? That is just something that the people have played enough to refine and make the best combination of cards that fit a deck. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to play that, but that has been refined to be the best version of that deck using literally the strategy I'm showing you now. So when my strategies look like something that you would see in the meta, that's because that's how deck building works. However, I'm going to give you tons of alternatives and you're going to be able to see what I mean, starting with these spells. So we can use any combination of small and big spell, pretty much. You could use log arrows. You could use a Fireball Log, which is a very popular combo because it provides that damage and it provides that swarm counter ability. But you can throw together any combination of spells that you think would help your win condition. We'll run this test. I mean, with Royal Giant, things like Log, it seemed like a go-to. Log, or maybe Bar Barrel, or Snowball, perhaps. We could go with Lightning for a big spell, Fireball for a big spell. But with Poison, I don't quite like to throw Poison in a lot of decks because the goal with the big spell is to get whatever you're trying to deal with out quickly. The Poison, its goal is to just stay on the board and provide that like area of effect for 8 seconds. It's kind of counterintuitive to what we're trying to do, is get something out fast. So I'll switch an example. We'll use a different win condition here. And we'll use, let's say, a Hog Rider. It's another popular win condition. What spells are going to help my Hog Rider out? Well, what's my Hog Rider weak to? It's also weak to buildings. It's weak to swarm cards, which is pretty much a lot of the win conditions in the game. So every time you're thinking of what spell to put in your deck, you're thinking of your card's biggest weaknesses and the spell that deals with the most of those weaknesses. Now, once again, the log is just a go-to. It kills almost everything. You can find scenarios that Snowball works, Zap works. You don't have to go with the log, but you would probably not go wrong going with the log. So as you can see, we probably need a big spell. You're going to see EQ used a lot with Hog Rider because it helps break through buildings. We're going to see Fireball used a lot because it helps break through specific cards. Even some people run Lightning because Lightning helps get through certain buildings and win conditions. But you're going to see that you can't just throw whatever in your deck because it's going to defeat the goal of your average elixir cost that we picked in the win condition start of the deck. So when you looked at the archetype, you decided what you were going to build your deck around, and if you're going to build a cycle deck and it ends up being extremely expensive, it's just not going to work because it won't cycle fast enough. So spells are really simple in the fact that you just look at your card's weaknesses and then pick a combination of big and small spell that you think you would get the most value out of. Now, obviously, you can choose to run a Void over Fireball, but certain cards are just stronger than other cards. So you can experiment with whatever you want, but that's going to be the main goal, is to pick a strong combination of 2 spells, a big spell and a small spell, that help your Hog Rider or whatever win condition you chose break through. Let's talk about support troops. This is where the building a deck will get the most confusing, or it could be completely simple. Your deck is going to go from either viable, it's going to either become viable and good, or it's going to be in the gutter with all the mid-ladder menaces. These 3 slots are our support troops. I'm trying to do this to make it as vague as possible so that no matter what win condition you chose, we can choose a support troop or up to 3 support troops that are going to benefit our win condition. Basically, you're going to want to pick any one of 3 support cards. And a support card is anything in the game that's not a spell or a win condition or a building. We're going to talk about buildings in a second. We can look at any of these, and it's so easy to just get overwhelmed and not know where to start. I'm going to give you some criteria. So 1, we need to have at least 1 ranged card in our deck that targets the air so we don't insta lose to everything in the air. This is a slot that if you're running cycle, let's say the hunter, you don't need more than one of them. If you're running a very fast cycle deck, you could run two of them based on the weaknesses and strengths of the rest of your deck. But if you're running a cycle deck, the thought process is I can cycle multiple of, let's say, the hunter. So I'm not going to necessarily have a need to go get another second air troop, because the hunter will do me fine if I just keep my cycle fast enough. That's why we're going to talk about filling out the rest of this deck in a second. But we want to keep an eye on this. We want to keep the elixir cost as low as you can, between 3 and usually 3.6, 3.8, depending on if you're playing cycle or not. Let me fill out this deck completely based off the meta decks and show you guys what I'm talking about. So people use the Fisherman in Royal Giant. I'll talk about this in just a second. I actually figured out a really good way to do this mid-recording. So if I go to a typical RG cycle deck, and what is the last card I'm missing? I'm missing a Ghost. So this is your go-to best version of Royal Giant, or one of them in the meta right now. Let's analyze this. What are we looking at here? Now, these 3 support card roles are Hunter, Royal Ghost, Fisherman. Why those 3? Well, the Royal Ghost is something that is playing the mini tank role. So it's going to be, while it's going to be able to deal good damage on defense, it's going to be able to soak up a little bit of damage. It is also a good offensive threat. And I'm using the Fisherman because the Fisherman is going to directly help my win condition and not make me have to use a building. So the Fisherman is going to be able to pull things off the Royal Giant, pull things, away from the Royal Giant, pull things, or go to buildings on offense, because he pulls himself towards buildings. And we've got the Hunter, because the Hunter is a very solid ranged card, pairs well with my Fisherman, and he is going to be able to be cycled based off the rest of my deck, so I don't need multiple air cards. We can literally just get rid of these. This is what I mean by a good support troop combination. Something that is cheap. You want to keep them between 3 to 4 average elixir. You want something that can pair well with each other. Like, let's say, we'll actually just switch on a couple of things. Let's say I don't want to use the Hunter. Let's say I want to use maybe the Phoenix. Maybe I'll use the Phoenix instead of the Hunter. Why? Because the Phoenix is still an air targeting unit. It doesn't have to be ranged. It can be just air targeting. You can use range if you want. You could use a Musketeer instead of here. But I'm going to use a Phoenix because it's in the air. It's going to help, support my Royal Giant a little bit. It's going to be a good presence and help. It doesn't need to synergize. You don't need to synergize with these. You can just have a decent role in your deck. And if we filled the rest of it out, we'd be able to cycle fast. So we could replace the Royal Ghost. Maybe I don't want to run the Royal Ghost. Maybe I don't have the Royal Ghost. Maybe I want something that can still soak up a little damage, but apply offensive pressure as well. And I could use something like, let's use the Dark Prince. Because he's going to, while he might not be as good as the Royal Ghost for what we wanted to do, you can use this still to soak up damage and get that offensive pressure. And, I'd still probably recommend using Fisherman. But we can look at the best decks in the game and break this down. What support troops are in this thing? We've got Lumberjack, Baby Dragon, and Ice Wiz. Why? Well, we have a beatdown deck that is kind of also a hybrid control deck. So if we look at control, we talked about good defense, slow, lethargic, good defense, building up counter pushes. So we've got things like the Baby Dragon, the Ice Wizard, the Tornado. Maybe we don't need high DPS. We need just control. We need to slow things down. We want to play good defense. So we've got Ice Wizard, great on defense. Baby Dragon, great on defense. Tornado. Why did we pick these two? Because they synergize perfectly with the Tornado. And they're also synergizing by backing up our Golem push. The Baby Dragon backs up the Golem push. Ice Wizard does to an extent. Lumberjack, he's going to play that role we kind of talked about with the Royal Ghost, where he's good on defense to an extent, but is more used on his offensive role. Looking at a cycle deck like this Drill NATO deck, what are our 3 support troops? We've got Goblins, we've got Goblin Demolisher, and we've got Firecracker. So you can see what I'm talking about. We can look at this simply through our lens. We've got the win condition, we've got the spells, and we've got our support troops. Why are we using these support troops? Well, we want to use a cycle deck, so we're trying to keep the elixir cost as low as possible. Goblin Demolisher is something that maybe he gives me really good value on offense. He applies extra offensive pressure. He does good enough on defense. We got Firecracker is going to be my range support troop role that targets air, so I don't insta-lose the lava. Maybe I like Goblins because they're a cheap answer. You can go through so many decks and just look at the support troop role. So that's kind of a deck I want to talk about here. We've got, recruits. What's our win condition? Well, you could argue that Skelly Barrel Wall Breakers, but remember when we talked about should you use a secondary win condition? Well, if I'm using Wall Breakers, I probably can't rely on them too consistently, so I'm going to use a Skeleton Barrel as well. And we'll throw in our Royal Recruits, our Mighty Miner, and our Firecracker as our support troop role. And that's kind of the support troop role. I'm happy to clarify it if you have any questions. I will be answering every comment under this post, but I hope that makes sense in regards to the support troop role. You want 3 cards. Start off with 3 cards. You want a card that's ranged, that targets the air, and supports your win condition. Why does this support our win condition? Because it's a spell bait card. This whole deck is spell bait. Every good deck you're going to see out there is an amazing way to start building your deck, and we could pick apart, let's say, this deck, and we could turn it into something else based off our criteria. Maybe we don't want to use Baby Dragon. Maybe we want to use the E-Wizard, or the E-Dragon, excuse me, because it's a bit easier to, maybe we want to use the E-Dragon, just for the hell of it. You could use that because it pairs this, it fits the same role. If we're going to, pick apart, maybe we don't want to use Lumberjack, maybe we could use something like the Royal Ghost, for example. But the Lumberjack is going to be the best option to give a bigger boost to our deck. So you're looking at support troops. You want to make sure that your defense is strong, of course, with your support troops. You have an air targeting unit. You have a good mix of offense and defense based off of what your win condition is. And you could pair literally any combo of 3 support troop cards that is keeping your elixir cost where you want it to be and are synergizing with each other or with the spells in your deck. And now going back to our Royal Giant deck, which I am going to switch out. I'll go once again with the Ghost just because I like him better in this deck. And we're looking for our final 2 slots. Now, do we want a building in our deck? This is entirely based off of what type of deck you're playing. If you're playing a cheaper deck with more defense in it and your win condition is something that doesn't need a whole bunch of support, consider running a building. I'm not going to put a building in this Royal Giant deck because I would rather fit an extra support troop to help me out. This is another slot that you could just throw away. If you don't want a building and you want to instead run a different support troop, go ahead. Be my guest that you can do that. Like maybe instead of using a Goblin Cage here, let me take a moment to think about what would be good. Maybe we want to use... I don't know. Maybe we want to use Skeleton Dragons. Maybe I'm just... Hell, I want to use double dragons, back up my golem. This is something you can do to your deck. You can just change it. And the last 2 cards are going to be something that you can use to just, or the 2 slots, sorry, or something that you can use to just balance out your deck. Maybe you want a building. Maybe your deck is something that would benefit more from even a third spell, or maybe you want to dumb down the cycle of your deck a little bit because it's too expensive, so we throw stuff like a Skeletons and an E-Spirit in here. I hope this makes sense. Does this make sense? These last 2 slots are just to fill out your deck. You can use an extra support troop. You can use maybe an extra win condition if your deck looks like it needs an extra win condition. You can use a cycle card to help your deck. Maybe instead of skeletons, we use goblins. Maybe we use guards. Maybe you can use literally whatever, man. You can use literally whatever, and trial and error is the best way to fix your deck. Go to events, go to classic challenges. You get every card and every evolution in the game for free to use at level 11. The competition is not insane in the first few wins. You could trial and error with your deck, and dude, use this feature. Just try out all these methods that I've given you in this video and just test it out. And obviously with evolutions, there's really not that much to go into. You can think about the rules I was talking about and swap the evolution in there. It's that simple. Whenever you're thinking about your support troop rules, consider using, an evolution, whatever evolution you have. Consider using that in the support troop role, and then think about the other 2 support troop cards, or maybe 3, or maybe 4. It literally doesn't matter. You can fill out, based on the last 2 cards in your deck, you can fill out whatever makes your deck better. And of course, ask me any questions. Make sure to remember all the tips we've talked about in this video, specifically going over archetypes, going over win conditions, remember everything we said and try and make your deck balanced around your win condition, always thinking about how you can make it stronger, what it needs to be better, should it use a building or not. That's completely up to whether you think it needs a building or not. There's obviously a right answer, but there is eventually no right answer to having fun. You can have fun however you want. I just wanted to give you a quick guide on how you can build your deck in 2025 to somewhat of a good degree to help you be able to climb ladder or climb Path of Legends, whatever it is you're looking to do, and maybe not be a meta slave. Although with maturity, you'll realize that the meta decks are the best decks for a reason. I hope that helped you. Have a great rest of your day.